Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Software Plaza podcast. I'm Twain Kaler, editor at Software Plaza. And if you like what you hear on this conversation, go and check out all of the other conversations we've had like this in the past. In fact, we're doing a part two today because we've done a part one already with the same startup and with the same guest that we have today last year sometime. So if you want a more introductory topic on what we're going to talk about today, go catch up with part one first and then come listen to this. That'll help. But check out all of the other stuff we've been doing as well. Got a lot of podcasts that we've done over the past almost 3 years now. So go check them out. I have with me today Neil Levine, who is the SVP product at Anchore. That's Anchore. And Anchore is into security, broadly speaking, but more specifically, recently, their focus has been SBOM, software bill of materials. And that's going to be the topic of our conversation as well, more specifically about just what they've been up to in the past year or so since Neil has been on the podcast. That's what we're going to be covering today. So with that introduction, let's get right into it. Neil, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining. Lovely to be talking to you about SBOMs and really looking forward to picking up from where we left off last time.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me back. Glad to be here.
All right. So yeah, last time we spoke about SBOMs, and you gave us an introduction about what SBOM is and some of the challenges organizations face, and even Anchore's approach to SBOM. But since then, you guys have been really busy at Anchore. We were thinking of doing this part two, I think 2 months ago, but then you had this big release coming, and so we said, let's just hold off. Let's let the release happen, and then we'll touch base, and so we can cover this release. So it sounds like a really big deal for you guys. So tell us a bit, Chris, kind of what's been happening in the past year. What have been some of the conversations leading up to this release? Why did this, some of the background behind the release, if you can start off with that.
Sure, and it's I can't remember exactly what details we went through last time we spoke, but Anchore's history comes from a startup which was very much looking at cloud native software development and cloud native applications, and was trying to solve some of the security problems which were emerging from the use of containers and so on. And the way it did that, although it didn't refer to it at the time as an SBOM, but the way it tried to tackle a problem was by generating SBOMs. I think we called them analysis artifacts many, many years ago, and storing all of the SBOMs for every container we ever saw. For whether that was in a CI/CD pipeline or it was in registry or in runtime, and so generate the SBOM, store the SBOM, and then allow the user to come along whenever they want to and ask security questions of those stored SBOMs. So that was sort of the history, and what's changed a lot over the past couple of years is one, the sort of the SBOMs moving from what was an architectural detail, it's how we did things, into actually being a first-class asset that people wanted to manipulate and store and manage and so on and so forth. And a lot of that has been driven through two things which are related, which is a bunch of hacks and security issues around specifically open source supply chain weaknesses, and a general sense of open source risk, and then compliance changes which have now asked for SBOMs, which have more or less been a response to some of those open source security hacks and so on. So we've now seen SBOMs move from maybe the cloud native world, where there was a sort of a emergent use of them a couple of years ago, into sort of every industry now having to worry about them, whatever type of software development they're doing. So yeah, it's moved out of sort of maybe just sort of your typical big software producers into sort of being a concern for anybody who's really shipping software, selling software, particularly into the government, but more generally now as well.
Yeah, I'm not too in touch with just the regulations around it, but other regulations like from the government side, in the US or in the EU that mandate SBOMs for particular industries or all industries? What's some of the regulations around SBOMs?
Yeah, so the big one, which is, and this has been a big change over the past year, is the CRA or Cyber Resiliency Act, which is a European Union directive. And yes, that's now driving the need to supply SBOMs to show. I think that, they talk about digital elements, anything with digital elements, which basically means software, which is almost everything now.
Mhm.
You need to produce the SBOM in order to be able to show that you can track and address any security issues. So that's the big one in the in Europe. In the US, there was an initial push to sort of drive SBOM creation, or through there was an executive order that came out under the Biden administration. It's changed a little bit since then. There are some more sort of sector specific things. So the big one we're seeing actually, which has come out in the past couple of months actually, it's not turned into a compliant to rule yet, but it's sort of equivalent to it, is the US Department of Defense, which is obviously a huge software buyer, starting to say, look, this will be one of the things that will require for anyone supplying software to the government, that they'll need to provide an SBOM in order to sort of get through the past hurdle of being able to sell. So yeah, there's a bunch of compliance things going on both sides of the fence, and it's part of a larger sort of theme of how do we address the security issues which have now become so visible through all of these open source hacks.
All right, very interesting. Wow, you must be seeing an influx of like curiosity about SBOMs, or just people just coming to you a lot more to talk about it. I want to ask about some of the operational challenges around SBOM, because you know, I think people are maturing to an extent to where they're going from, we need some kind of SBOM to now where they're going like, we need to be more strategic about it, how we are doing it, and how it can scale, how it can kind of evolve with our systems. What are some of the operational challenges that have come up, especially over the past year? And I'm
Mhm.
guessing some of that might have played into your recent product release as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple. I mean, you can sort of take it maybe through different phases. So first one is just in terms of like generating the SBOMs. You know, Anchore has sponsored a very popular project called Sift, which is an SBOM generator, which people use to generate SBOMs. But there's a lot of software ecosystems where it's quite hard to generate an SBOM because it's lots of binaries, or it's lots of software which has got no metadata. It's hard to know what it is. So there are still challenges around getting high fidelity SBOMs, which give
Mhm.
you all of the transparency that you need. And this will be forever now. This is we're always going to be trying to improve the quality, but I think a lot of people are just realizing some parts of my software stack are easy to generate SBOMs and others are slightly harder. And that's certainly the case in maybe places where there's more embedded software and less sort of cloud native software in effect, which tends to
Mhm.
be slightly easier to sort of build the SBOM for. So does that sort
Yeah.
of the quality of generation, and even if you can identify all the software, I'm trying to gather all the parts which are necessary to make it useful, whether it's, do you know who the author is the version accurate, all this kind of information is still a challenge. And that's one that, as an industry, we're still trying to improve constantly. The second challenge is probably just around sprawl. A modern software application or a modern piece of, like a car is a good example of, it's like lots and lots of software embedded into it. When you have lots of software development teams trying to sort of herd all of these parts of a sprawling enterprise organization to sort of generate SBOMs in a consistent way and get it all into one place is still an organizational challenge, if nothing else. And it's less about the technology and just a problem that product security teams have always faced, which is trying to understand what is the map of development activity across their organization. Before it was to ensure best practices. Now it's to sort of try and get the data out of them to ensure that they are storing all these SBOMs. So there's a sort of that sprawl and organizational map.
Mhm.
And the third one is, just the practical one of, I think a lot of people are still trying to, there's a lot of effort to generate and store these SBOMs. It's like, are we getting use out of them? So I think that the third concern is like the value for the effort, which is often a problem in security. You know, you do a lot of effort, but is it actually improving your
Mm,
security posture? And
mm,
so this comes back to what we were speaking about earlier. It's very easy to understand when it's compliance driven. Okay, we have to do this because we're
mm,
going to be giving it to our supplier or our sorry our customer or consumer, the downstream user.
mm,
But I think a lot of product security teams are still trying to understand, look, what else can we do with this SBOM? What other value does it bring that we can demonstrate, the value of the effort or the cost involved in storing and generating all the SBOMs.
mm. Really interesting challenges there, and I'm sure that that probably resonates with a lot of listeners when you think about just how their systems are set up and how they try to create SBOMs for them and some of the things they come up with. You mentioned sprawl. I was wondering also about is there sprawl even when it comes to SBOMs within organizations, like the number of SBOMs, probably different teams have different SBOMs, different projects have different SBOMs. Is there overlap? Is there conflicts between them?
Mhm.
Uh, that's one thing I wanted to know. And also related to, you mentioned one of the formats that Anchor sponsors, Swift or something, one of those projects. I
SIFT,
was
yeah.
wondering, Swift, yeah. Um, I was wondering if, if there's an agreed format for creating SBOMs or some sort of, consistent pattern, file type, something like
Yeah, no,
that.
there are two major standards, formal
Okay.
standards for SBOMs, which are SPDX and Cyclone DX. So Cyclone DX came out of OWASP, and SPDX is under the auspices of the Linux Foundation. So
Mm,
those are the two main types. There are some variations between them, but more obviously storing a lot of very similar information here. SIFT is a tool to generate that SBOM. It can generate it in both of those standards. It actually generates a lot more data than those standards typically need or expect or require. We generate a lot of data for our own product, obviously, and we can then take that data, shrink it down to get it into one of these two common formats. So most organizations are picking a format. It's not, the format is just a schema.
okay.
It's just, so you pick one for, it maybe religious reasons. I'm not sure that, it's both are pretty widely used right now. So it's less around the format challenges. I think the sort of the generation and sprawl issue tends to be, it's a lot of different tools, because one tool like SIF can generate for lots of things, Linux containers, virtual machine file systems, a Git tree. It can do lots of things, but in sort of the longer tail of software ecosystems, and so why embedded is a really good example. There's a lot of embedded software, and some of them are very, very proprietary. There's not a lot of open source tooling to generate an SBOM. It might be the sort of the people, there's a tool within that, a single tool within that ecosystem, and it generates, data in its own specific way. It might get it into one of the formats, but a lot of data is missing, or it's not sufficient to sort of really help with security analysis. So it tends to be, once you bring all this information into one place, there's a huge variation over it. And so if you're trying to do things like maybe a vulnerability analysis, or you're trying to package it up to give to a downstream consumer to use, some has got very high quality data because it's maybe from some Linux images, but then some is very low quality because it's from some embedded system. And so it tends to sort of be that unevenness, which is what the product security teams have to stitch it all together are typically dealing with.
Yeah, all right. Cool. Yeah. Last question before we get into like the solution to all of this is I want to ask about just keeping SBOMs up to date. What are some of the challenges around that? Because the systems are constantly changing. How do you make
Mm.
sure your SBOM is accurate and as things change, it's keeping up?
So, do you mean in terms of, it's just what I'm
And
saying, you're talking
is
the sort of,
is that a challenge? What are the challenges around that, and how do people
right?
handle those challenges?
Yeah. So what is this? there's probably two areas here, which is, and this is a good, we have an existing situation with this, which is, as I mentioned before, the tools are evolving all the time, and so their ability to extract information from software artifact is getting better over time. They can generate better, as I call it, higher fidelity SBOMs. And so sometimes, the customer generates an SBOM at a period of time, we get what we can, you store it, you do the analysis of it, but then later on, hey, the tool can detect more now. It can get better information. So do we still
Yeah.
have access to the original software to go and rescan it?
Mm.
So there is that sort of that sense of the software hasn't changed, but the tool to generate the SBOM has changed, and so you have to rerun it. But do you still have
Mm.
access to it? Where is that software? That can often be a challenge.
Yeah.
There is a second source of debate, which is should SBOMs change over time, which is, should there be like a living SBOM which describes the application, and so as the application evolves, the SBOMs continue to change and update, and essentially it's a living document, or should these things sort of be considered immutable alongside the particular piece of software that it came from? So there's a difference of approach there as well around whether, is the SBOM a description of a point in time, or is it something, that and it's immutably tied, or is it something that should evolve over time and a customer just has one SBOM and it's constantly ebbing and flowing, and packages are coming in and out and versions are changing. So there's still a sort of like a how you manage change over time. I think there's some best practices which still yet to be nailed down. Though we have our view that these things should be immutable. They should refer to a specific software. The software changes, you get a new SBOM. But
Ah,
that generates its own trade-offs.
all right, great. Yeah. So getting into your view, I'm curious to know just about, we discussed quite a few of the challenges around SBOMs, and I think even, the challenges that we just discussed, they're not beginner challenges. They're more like once you've started,
Mm.
uh, creating SBOMs for a while, these are challenges you would run into. And I think that's probably the thought that's also, influenced your recent release. So tell us about just, your approach to these challenges, and what's like give us probably the top level driving thought behind the release
Mm.
and getting into the solution, and then we get into some more detail.
Yeah, so the top thoughts coming, what were the drivers behind the release? So number one was, I mentioned earlier, was to recognize that SBOM management was now not just an issue for sort of like modern cloud native applications. It was a necessity for many industries who even weren't even doing cloud industry. So we wanted to broaden the ability to manage SBOMs other than things we generate. Say, look, now SBOMs are generated by lots of vendors. They provide them. The suppliers give them to you. You need a place to stick them all, irrelevant of where they come from. So there was a driver, so just in terms of to recognize we can't always be the sole generator of SBOMs, and that's fine. The second one was that while compliance is definitely the sort of the driver of a lot of adoption right now, security teams are also trying to use these SBOMs to generate, to inform their, vulnerability analysis and sort of just their actual, to do security, real security, not just to sort of the compliance necessities. But it was a lot of data where it's a lot of bad data can cause a lot of bad security
Mm.
alerts. And so how do we ensure that there's good quality SBOMs with good quality security um, alerts, and that teams can focus their time on actually fixing things that matter or being drawn to the issues which matter inside those SBOMs? So the typical signal noise issue, but centered around SBOM content. So those are sort of like the sort of the drivers going into the solution we've been
Mm.
working on.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, so I described Anchor at the start as being in the security space, but I just figured out it's actually the compliance space, and it seemed like security is the second
Yeah, I
focus.
mean no, I mean it's both. I think this is we're having an active debate. They're two sides of the same coin. A lot
Mm.
of security teams are funded. The reason they get funding is because they got to do compliance. That's a lot of what goes into sort of the reason, but they've also got to, you know, of course they have to improve the security outcomes of the organization. So
Mhm.
no, it's both for us. And but yes, you know, compliance is a big focus because we have a you know, a large public sector business, and you know, compliance tends to be very front and center of what they care about. But yeah, the two are twinned. It's hard to sort of separate them out.
Right. Neat. So tell us about the top features in this release, top two or three of them.
So I sort of hinted at them already. So, you know, the main one's the ability to just import SBOMs, even if they've not been generated by us and, you know, some of these popular standards. The ability to sort of, you know, group them together to represent applications or services or, you know, physical devices or whatever it happens to be. And the
Mhm.
third one is like a specific scoring mechanism we've actually provided to have some signal noise separation, so you can know what you should be focusing on first when you're actually looking at the actual security status of these individual SBOMs here.
All right, all right. Wow, really interesting. So the bring your own SBOM,
Mm.
tell us a bit more about that. How does it help? Why is it important? What were some of the challenges with implementing it? Are you guys one of the only ones doing it, or are there a few others doing it as well? Give us some more
No,
context.
no, I mean, look, bring your own SBOM or BYOS. I mean, it's a useful phrase to describe, hey, you've already got an SBOM, it's been given to you, you need to get into, you know, you need to do something with it, you need to put it somewhere. So it's to call out the distinction between um, where we, or you know, whoever vendor you're using is responsible for generating the SBOM as part of their sort of security solution and so on. So this is just to indicate that you get there's a lot of SBOMs now out in the ecosystems, you know, that customers are participating in, and of varying quality. And I think that's the big thing here. It's like, you know, you're bringing your own SBOM, you don't know what's in it, you don't know how good it is, bring it into the system, and we'll try and help you start to get value from it.
All right, all
So,
right.
you know, it's just it's a you know, useful phrase to sort of distinguish
Yeah, yeah.
between, yeah,
No,
we're
no.
generating SBOMs automatically as part of the pipeline, and Anchore's, you know, handling that. So
Mhm. So, if it's an SBOM generated outside of Anchor, do you layer on once it comes into Anchor? Do you layer on any metadata, or do you
mm.
analyze it in some way? Do you, like you mentioned, you get more value from it? Could you tell us a bit more about that? How does that happen? What kind
Yes,
of?
I mean, so you know, I mean, the main focus is to sort of do vulnerability analysis, right? I mean, of course, that's still the most important thing that people want to do, and that's what we focused on here. You know, over time, we're definitely intending to extract as much sort of insights from those SBOMs as you can, but vulnerabilities is obviously the sort of the 101. That's the essential thing that um, people need. But no, you know, this is the thing, as I said before, you know, if the SBOM is what it is and it's been given to you, you have to do the best with what you've got. You don't have you don't have access to the original software artifact. So the SBOM is what you've got. That's what you've got to what you have to use. And so yes, you know, we're not doing any enrichment of it, so to speak. You know, you have to take it on face value. So that our main goal is to make sure, look, we're letting you know this is possible, this is not possible, these are the gaps, this is what's missing. You know, to essentially sort of create that back pressure, back up the chain to say, look, if you know, you've got to go ask your vendor and tell them this information is missing, the quality SBOMs is not very good. So to sort of give that transparency to the end users, so they can have that conversation with whoever gave them the SBOM.
All right, all right. And that ties into also kind of the second challenge you spoke about earlier, which is about just you know, the fidelity of SBOMs, that some of them, well, there's different quality levels for different SBOMs.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think this ties into that. What about also the third thing that you mentioned, which is the score? Uh, how is the score calculated? What does it tell us?
Yeah, so the score is it's essentially just an algorithm which looks at multiple variables to help you work out what's the most important thing to deal with. So at the moment, it's a fixed algorithm. You know, we look at things like Obviously, CVSS data, the type of things you get with a CVE. But other things like we're bringing EPSS data, which is about risk rather than just about severity levels. And so, how likely is the thing going to be exploited? The presence on a KEV list, is it something that's being actively exploited and the government's noted it? So it computes a bunch of variables and sort of helps rank them. The plan is over time we're going to add more variables and
Mhm.
also allow the user to sort of customize that algorithm to factor in their own personal company preferences. They may discount EPSS, prefer CVSS, or vice versa. So at the moment, it's a sort of in the first release of this, it's a fixed algorithm. But essentially, it's just in order to you'll see if I give it a quick demo in a minute, it's just to rank the thing and say, look, the things with the top score. That's the thing you should be looking at first in terms of doing your triage and vulnerability analysis.
Sense. Yeah, you got us really interested in it. Give us the demo walkthrough
Sure.
of some of the new features.
Sure. Let me share my screen and take you through it. So I'll keep it brief, but so this is the new view we have for, again, imported SBOMs or the BYOS, bring your own SBOM concept here. So the first thing is, we have a concept of groups. So a lot of the SBOMs, they're all, you have kind of many SBOMs which relate to different images or artifacts or so on, but typically what your customer is interested in is like, if it's asking for an SBOM of all of the things which make up a service or an application or a device, like a fridge or a car, if you're in that sort of manufacturing world. So, the first thing, obviously, you want to be able to create the group, give it a name. So, this would be, Twain software product, whatever it happened to be. If I can type, oh, it's hard to type and talk. And this is your shipping version 2.0 of this thing here. So we'll create the group, and now that we have the group, let's go ahead and upload our first SBOM from this thing here. So again, just your great product might have, I don't know, let's call it a front-end web service, and this is the second version of the front-end web service. We give it some, you can give it some metadata keys. You might want to add your own information about personnel, team, date, who knows, up to you, arbitrary. And then obviously let's go grab, and I got a test JSON here. We got a JSON file. This is an SBOM that's in CycloneDX format, and you'll see that after I upload it. I did generate it using the SIF tool, but again, as long as it's in that format, it doesn't matter how it's been generated, which tool was used to create it. So we'll go ahead and upload it and hope that the demo gods are kind. And here it is. Okay. So now you
So
can see we have
is this,
CycloneDX as the,
is this file an example of an SBOM that was created outside of Anchor system?
yeah, I mean, it's exactly. I mean, the point being, as long as it's in a standard recognized format, you'll be able to upload it. So here, this is where we get into some of the details. So you can start to see here, this is where we're giving you some insight into, look, is it a valid format? CycloneDX, SPDX, and one of the supported versions. Is it meeting all of the schema requirements within that? And then, you start to see other things where, hey, we can see some things which are missing. So there's no authors listed in the components. There's no suppliers. And so, for example, with the NTIA, which is a US agency, they set some minimum fields around things that must be present in order to sort of classify as a good quality SBOM, which they'll accept. This is where you can start to see, okay, look, there's some data missing here. So this maybe represents a incomplete SBOM from a compliance perspective. So, here we've got obviously some metadata about the file itself. Where we're trying to get into some of the value kit, you can obviously start off by browsing all of the contents. You're going to get a list of all of the packages and things which have been formally enumerated. And again, this is only the quality here is only as good as the SBOM generation tool. And so the tool updates, generates more information. You'll see more packages. So we are doing an automatic vulnerability analysis, and this is where you can start to see, the Anchore Rank here. So, this is where, as I mentioned before, it's looking at things like CVSS, EPSS, and KEV data. And if it's got high in all of those, it's on KEV. It's got a really high risk factor, really high severity factor, and that's going to get a much higher ranking. That gets you up to the list here. So this is independent to just like the flat out CVSS score, because you can have things with a very low score or a medium score, say, but they're really being actively exploited everywhere. So even though it's not that severe a problem, it's just very, very active. So it's much more likely that you're going to get exploited. So this is a good example where you have to computing all of these different variables gives you a slightly more realistic sense of, okay, this is the thing that I should really be fixing. If you want to
Mhm.
discount that and just look at standard CVSS information, that's fine.
Mhm.
So here, this gives you the basic overview of all of the different bits and pieces. Critically here, I've only got one SBOM within my group, but if I upload multiple SBOMs, then you can download them all as a single artifact. So again, this comes back to sort of the real end user workflow, which is source all of the individual SBOMs from my different development teams, bring them all
Mhm.
into one place, do my security and vulnerability analysis here, but then download that single artifact to give to my customer or my partner or my downstream user of set, and it's like, okay, here is the SBOM of the thing that I'm selling you or I'm giving you or you've purchased, and so you can do your own ongoing security analysis from there. So you don't have to stitch it all together. It's just a single artifact, again in one of the standardized formats.
All right. All right.
There we go. Very brief. Try to keep that to 3 or 4 minutes, but hopefully gives you
Yeah.
the high level overview.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it was really interesting. And I don't know if it's actually needed, but are there actually any like collaboration features, like, like if I want to talk to someone else on my team about an SBOM, like does Anchor enable that kind of like communication around an SBOM, or is that something that would happen outside? You just do the.
No, no, we do. So we do have integrations with various other ticketing systems, and we have an
Okay.
API which can generate webhooks and so on and so forth. So yes, no, there's an event stream around activities on these things to sort of generate automated alerts. So we have quite a bit of a roadmap around that.
Okay. Yeah.
But yes, there's Anchor has always been around automated compliance workflows and automated security workflows, and so our API is key to sort of driving that, sort of getting the data out of the system to sort of
Yeah.
create
Yeah.
and workflows.
Makes sense. Any other example that you would share about your focus on automation itself? Any other features that make things easier?
Mm. Um, so this definitely brings in. I mean, our tool is fantastic if you do want to generate SBOMs using our tool, which is Sift, which is an open source version. We have a commercial version of that, which we sell with Anchor Enterprise. This is typically where you want to instrument that in CI and have SBOMs generated ideally at build times, or we have other mechanisms where when you're deploying something, we can generate an SBOM at that moment in time if you want to. So automation there is really about getting the SBOM generated at the moment that makes sense from your business. That's where you don't have to ask a software engineer to do anything. It's not a manual step. It's automated as part of build, store, deploy, run. That would be the automation aspect. Certainly the area which we're interested in exploring further is that's the sort of the beginning of the stage. It's the automation at the very end. How can we generate information in the compliance formats which requires as little intervention as possible from humans or security engineers to go through? So a lot of the automation's on the reporting output. We have a reporting engine, it can generate information, but getting that automated so it's pushing it to where it needs to go with some on an ongoing basis as opposed to requiring human intervention is definitely, that's something we're exploring for our roadmap over the next couple of months.
All right. Okay. That kind of answers my next question. That was going to be about just looking ahead over the next year or so, where you see a lot of focus and what you got your mind on, maybe what's coming up for the next release that we'd be talking
Mm.
about maybe next year sometime. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, or if that itself.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very, very active roadmap planned out here, so which can be broken down to a couple of topics. So a lot more on the vulnerability management side, sort of to really help with the end-to-end workflow around you getting all these random SBOMs. How can you do remediation, annotation, VEX creation, VEX being the way you describe, the vulnerabilities you have and what you're doing about them. So a large part of workflows around that. A large part, as I mentioned, around some of the reporting and the sort of the output of the compliance information. And then the last part, which is what I'm most interested in, is what we're calling SBOM insights, which is once we have all this data, you can obviously come to us and ask questions around vulnerabilities or licenses or all the typical sort of questions that security teams have. But what information can we tell you about your software artifacts that you don't even know about? Highlighting where you have maybe version sprawl or people using versions which are, out of date, or things where around the quality of the software that you're using. Can we identify patterns where, certain teams or applications are using sort of inferior quality components based on various criteria, what I mean that is. But so a lot of trying to mine these SBOMs as a very large pool of data to sort of help inform security teams about issues which they may not have been aware of.
Yeah, well, really cool stuff. Definitely come back and tell us about it soon. We'd love to have you back for a part
Of
3.
course,
All
very
right,
welcome to.
with that we come to the end of our conversation. Just one question for you, Neil, though, before we finish off is tell us one of your favorite productivity hacks.
Yes, I love productivity hacks. My favorite one, and it's the easiest one to do, is actually color code your calendar invites. Especially when you work in a large organization, you're working with a lot of internal teams, external customers, you have a lot of regular meetings. Color code things so you can step back and get the balance of, like, am I spending more time talking to internal people or external people? How many of my meetings are recurring? How many of them are one-offs? Color coding it, which I'm very diligent about, just gives you a sense of how you're spreading your time over the week and month, which I find really useful to help me correct when I'm having too much of one type of meeting.
Sounds like you have a colorful calendar.
I have a very colorful calendar. Yeah, it looks like a Jackson Pollock painting, but Google Calendar, it's definitely, that's what I use. It supports it. I'm sure the other calendaring applications do, but yeah, color your invites.
Yeah, I think I should do that too. Great. That was wonderful chatting. Thanks so much for joining us, Neil. It was a pleasure.
No, I'm very happy to speak to you again, and hopefully come back soon.
Great. And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation around SBOMs. Go and check out what Anchore is doing. Check out the recent release and all of the new stuff that they've just shipped. And tune in again for the next episode, because we'll be continuing our conversation with lots of other organizations in this space. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.